there is a way to protect your heart from anger, self-centeredness, and hate. Learn kindness.
There is a way your soul can experience real beauty and joy. Love kindness.
There is a way to change the world. Be kind.
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see you. We've really been in God's presence. Your worship has been incredible. And so God pours a lot of grace into that. And I'm grateful that you're a part of the experience. And so before we jump into the message, I need to do a sort of a way to go moment. And so last week, we asked you just to bring bags of food for those who are in need in our community. And we have a couple of ministry partners that we work alongside in order to distribute that food in the name of Jesus. And so you just overwhelmed us. It was incredible, all of the bags of food. In fact, it took a huge army to get it over to our partner. And when they saw it, their eyes sort of became saucers and they called for reinforcements, And so anyway, it was just incredible. And so a person there told our group that it looked like about 3,000 pounds of food. And so that is a way to go, Bear Creek. Yeah, you should, yeah. So I think they told our group that all the area churches that had contributed, this was the one largest contribution of food in all the churches in the area. So Bear Creek, great job. What an act of kindness, because it's in the name of Jesus. So we've been in this series. It's called Be Kind, Change the World. And the bottom line is this: our kindness can change the world. And so our kindness can change the world, not because it'll just make the world a nicer place or so that we all become nicer people. It is the kind of kindness that God calls on us as Christ followers to demonstrate that could radically change the world. It could cause them to look to God to be the source of their life. And so that's what this series has been about. And so, as you know, we jumped in 6 weeks ago. The first thing we said is that God calls us to a radical and excessive kindness that came from Luke 6, those 7 categories of just, like mind-bending kindness that was there. And then secondly, we said there's a motive. There's a motive for this kind of kindness. And our motive as followers of Jesus is so that we would be like our Father in heaven. That passage says, incredibly, to be like our Father who is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be like Him. And then we move to how to develop this in your life, how to grow this virtue in your life. And so we took the opportunity to describe how a follower of Jesus develops any virtue, any spiritual virtue in their life. And so we worked through the principles of here's how you develop such a virtue. It is by imitation. We see Jesus, we see His life, and it just it so turns us to wanting it in our life. So it's by imitation and then practice and empowerment. And so we work through those principles. Then we turn to a demonstration, really a description of what does this kindness look like. The sort of kindness that Jesus calls on us to demonstrate. What does it look like? And so we went to the second passage in Luke. We've only been in Luke for this. We went to Luke 10, one of Jesus' teaching stories. In fact, it may be His best known. Out of 40 teaching stories in the New Testament, this may be His best known. And in fact, once we got there, my plan was only to be in it one message. We're now entering the third message in that teaching story because it turns out to be this endless supply of insight into a Jesus kind of kindness. And so Jesus tells this story. He tells the story of a nameless man walking along a known treacherous road. He turns a hairpin curve and he sees a crumpled figure in the path before him. He knows exactly what has happened. The man has been robbed, beaten, stripped, left for dead. And what he does next defines for us what a Jesus kind of kindness even looks like. And so we enter that passage again. And so it's Luke 10, and I'm going to just start with the story itself. And so it begins in verse 30, and so Jesus replies. He's answering this sort of insincere question, but that's not the point at the moment. The point is this teaching story that Jesus tells. And so it begins in verse 30, and so it says there that Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, he has just set a context that all of his listeners already know. Jerusalem to Jericho. That's 17 miles from Jerusalem to the north of Jericho, and that road descends 3,000 feet in 17 miles. And so it's treacherous. Think of all the hairpin curves and the cutout places and the caves and all of these places. And so the road was well known to be a place of the highwaymen, the robbers. And so everyone knows that's what's going to happen to this man. And so he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed and leaving him half dead. And so now by chance a priest was going down that road. And so a priest is the most religious person in Jesus' day. He works in the temple of God. He offers sacrifices for people's sin to God. And so his faith should be the center of his life. And so when he saw him, when he saw the wounded man, the Bible says he passed by on the other side. And then so likewise a Levite, also a worker in the temple, also someone whose faith should be at the center of his life. When he came to the place, he saw him and he passed by on the other side. Verse 33, then Jesus says, but a Samaritan. And so the listeners of Jesus suddenly, instantly became angry at him for introducing such a character. There was such hatred and animosity toward the Samaritans in Jesus' day and in his area. Why on earth would Jesus even mention a Samaritan? And so a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where the wounded man was, verse 33, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And he went to him, and he bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, wait, don't say that, right? Whatever more you spend, I will repay whenever I come back. He opened himself up to be defrauded even in the midst of his kindness. And then Jesus turns to the man who he's telling the story, and he says, okay, so religious scholar, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? And in my imagination, this man would not make eye contact with Jesus. He looked down, he mumbled his answer, hoping nobody around him would even hear, well, I suppose it was the one whom showed mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. And so there's a bottom line in this teaching story. It's a big idea, and the big idea, here's the bottom line for Jesus in this kind of kindness. He's saying this story, look at this story, this is kindness. Now just go and do it and change the world. And we're going to work with that big idea over the next few moments. And so what Jesus has done here, he's been asked this insincere question by the religious scholar, but Jesus looks through that and he just begins to drill down into this man's heart, just as he's drilling down into our hearts at this moment. And so he reframes that question. It is not, who is my neighbor? Who can I limit my love down to? Who can I limit my kindness down to? Rather, Jesus is saying who proved to be the neighbor. Who is it in that story, he's saying, that expressed such kindness and such compassion and such sacrificial love that the man's need was met? That's the definition. You're asking the wrong question, in fact. And so it's from this story that Jesus is telling, that we've just drawn out principles. And so, as I said, I'm in like the third week of this one story, because it turns out to be this endless supply of principles. And so we've said, look, this story teaches us this, sort of get principles, these G-E-T, get principles. One of those principles was, look, get rid of all of our own self-justifications for being unkind. Because we live in that kind of compartmentalized world, and Jesus is seeking to crash all of that for us, to really redefine kindness for us. And so he's saying to us, look, you've got to get rid of the self-justifications that tell you that there are many times, there are ways in which you can just be unkind. Another one of those principles is, Jesus has said to us, so also get honest about a false belief that a lot of us carry. This false belief that was true in the two earlier people's lives of this story, the two religious guys, this dichotomy they could have in their life, this split in their life, that I can, in some way, I think that I can love God and be devoted to God and yet not love the person in whom God's image resides, who is in need. 1 John the apostle tells us that's impossible. Jesus' story here is telling us that's an impossibility. It's not just a false belief, it's a dangerous belief. And then last time, we got to the Samaritan, and then his life just started pouring principles out on us. And so we said that the next get principle is this. Look, just get the definition of kindness right. And so, yes, I have whacked away at kindness being defined as, paying for the coffee and the person behind you. I know I've whacked away at that. You know what? It's a kind thing to do. It is a kind. Keep doing that. Keep Starbucks, stock way up. Okay, do that. Do it. Just don't make it the definition of kindness for you, because it's not that for Jesus. Because here's the unmatched opportunity we have with the teaching story that Jesus gives us. He's making it up. So he gets to put the elements in it that help describe what he believes that kindness actually is. And so we said that, look, for Jesus, kindness looks like this, that kindness is produced by compassion. That's what was going on in the Samaritan. That was not going on in the other two men. He felt compassion for the man. Then Jesus thinks that he thinks that kindness is demonstrated by these radical acts of love. It's not just simply advocating for something or clicking a box or even raising your voice and saying, somebody should do something about this. Somebody has got to even more than that. Then Jesus tells us he thinks that kindness could be costly. The man goes to great expense to care, opens himself up to be defrauded by the innkeeper, well known in Jesus' time to be unscrupulous people, opens himself up for being defrauded by him. And then Jesus thinks that kindness involves deep personal involvement. This man got elbow deep in the wounded man's needs. And so he's just redefining it for us. And what's his goal there? His goal there really is to smash all of our categories of what we used to call kindness, and his goal here is to rebuild for us a new vision of what it means to have, to express, to demonstrate a Christ, a Jesus kind of kindness. And so it moves us into the next principle. These are get principles. And so it's not just get the definition right, but secondly, get the motive right. Jesus is telling us that this kind of kindness will never enter our life and never be demonstrated by our life until we get our motive right. Because as long as our motive is, I'm doing this kind thing in order to get you to think that I'm a really nice guy, or in order to get you to affirm me and compliment me, then never will radical or category-busting kindness ever come into our life. In fact, we've got a touch motive. And the New Testament gives us these two really core motives for bringing this kind of kindness into our lives. And the first one of those is really internal. It's really inside you. And so what's our motive? Why would I want to demonstrate this kind of kindness? Here's why. Because I want to grow into a reflection of Jesus. So if you haven't been exposed to our teaching at Bear Creek, maybe this is sort of new to you. Actually, our teaching here grows simpler and simpler with every year. And I can tell you for most messages, I can tell you my goal. I want you to know Jesus from what you've heard. I want you to fall in love with Jesus from what you've heard. And I want you to be transformed into a replica of Jesus as a result of what you hear. And so your goal, your motive here is to be turned into a reflection of who He is. And so look at what Ephesians 5 tells us about this motive. It's Ephesians 5, it's verse 8. And so this is like a before and after statement. This is like before a person comes to Christ and embraces the gospel, has the effect of the gospel, transform their life. This is a before and after. And so look at how he puts it. In such strong terms, he says in verse 4, at one time you were darkness. That's got identity in it. He's not saying you were exposed to darkness, you had some darkness around you. He's saying you were darkness. It filled you. But in coming to Christ, something radical has happened. And he goes on to say there, do you see it? You are now light. It's not that you're just exposed to light. It's not that you just know light. It is that you have become light. Now look at what is next. Walk as children of light. The word walk means how you live your life, but it means it in the most incremental way, in your walking around life, in your step-by-step life, in your day-to-day, moment-by-moment life, how you actually live your life every moment. In that part of your life, be light. For the fruit, because it has an effect. It has a radiance. And so for the fruit of light is found in all that is good, a synonym of kindness, and right and true. It radiates from your life. And so look at what this is telling you. Because Christ lives in you, you carry the properties of light. Light brings warmth, and it gives direction, and it stimulates life. And so the light in you is the life of Jesus. And so the light that you are is this outward reflection of Him. And your motive for radical, excessive kindness is you want to reflect that in you. And so what does it mean? It means this. It means for you internally to learn the practice, the spiritual practice of compassion that produces kindness, and the kindness that stimulates doing radically good things in others' lives. You know, this is really a core reason why Jesus would give us that principle that He does in Luke 6. It's a little earlier in the Luke 6 passage. You're going to know this principle the moment I began to say it. In fact, I'm going to see if you can follow me. And so in verse 31, He says, so treat others, what? The way that you want to be treated. We know that principle, don't we? And so why did He give us that principle? Did He give us that principle so that we could just all be, really good people, be recognized as good people? Or did He actually give it to us in order to stimulate a transformation in us. And here it is. Here's why He's given it to us. This is a way that He trains us for radical kindness. If you take that principle on, it is a way to learn the practice of radical kindness because there is no way to treat another person the way you would want to be treated if you were in their situation unless you put yourself in their situation. Unless you learn to practice real empathy. So it turns out, you almost never have to be kind as long as you don't see. You never will have a conflict in your heart as long as you don't look. And Jesus is just saying this principle is a part of the practice of learning how to become kind. Then empathy stirs compassion, and compassion produces kindness, and then you begin transforming into a reflection of Jesus. But there's a second motivation, there's a second motive, and it's just a half step forward from the other, but it makes all of the difference. And look at the half step forward. It's not just to grow into a reflection of Jesus, but it is to show the world Jesus. It's to show the world Jesus through you. This is huge. And so what is He calling on us to do? Well, look, according to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, look at what He says. Look, you're the light of the world. A city set on the hill can't be hidden. And so, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. In the same way, your life. Let your light shine before others. One translation here says, in such a way. In such a way. And so, let your light shine before others in such a way that they see your good works and they give glory to your Father in heaven. And so what is your motive? Is your motive to be affirmed and complimented and be seen as a good guy? Or He's saying, no, the motive is this. It is to shine. It is to let others see this kindness and goodness, but it should be so radical. It should be so category busting. It should be so excessive that they skip looking at you. That they see the act and they go, I cannot believe that. Where did that person get that power, or that motivation, or that kind of love? They just skip over you. And they say, I want that source in my life. And so what does it mean? It means this in your walking around life. It means this. It means that you don't owe the customer service person your wrath. It means you don't owe them your wrath. You owe them light. Because of who you are, you owe them kindness. You don't owe the wild driver your wrath. You owe them light. You owe them kindness because of who you are. You don't owe your spouse or your sibling your wrath for offending and hurting you. You owe them light. You owe them kindness because of who you are. And really, this is where the test of kindness gets defined, right? It is easy to show a single act of kindness to a stranger. It is easy to do that and call yourself kind. Look, here is the challenge. Here is where kindness is defined, and that is to practice consistent kindness in the closest circle around you, a spouse, a parent, a sibling. In fact, if you have the courage, if you are intrepid enough, take this test in the last 3 days. In the last 3 days, think about your life in the last 3 days. Would your spouse or your child or your parent or your sibling characterize you as deeply kind? Is this one of those move on moments? Is this where you're saying, okay, it's time to move on, right? So let's do that. This is about thinking through how you live your life and living it in such a way that by the goodness flowing out of it, others see and feel a divine presence. It means experiencing a transformation over time. It's this simple, this inner transformation of, look, this is what it's about. I just simply don't want to live for me anymore. I just want to live for Him. Let's go to the next. And it's the last. Here's the last thing Jesus says. The last thing He says is, look, get the definition right, get the motive right, get going. Here's third, get going right now. It's the last thing that Jesus says. It's application. This is how He applies the story. Verse 36, he asks the application question, which one of those proved to be the neighbor? He makes the man answer. The man says, the one who showed mercy. And then Jesus gives us the bottom line. And for Jesus, here's the bottom line. Then you go and do the same. You go and do the same. Do you see suddenly that this is not an academic, religious, theological question for Jesus? Hey, in a hypothetical, situation, what if you were to, run into this great need? Hypothetically, theologically, what would be the right thing to do? Jesus actually smashes all of that when He says, look, here it is. You go and do the same. You go and do the same. Go and start doing it now. This is very personal for Jesus. And so going and doing likewise really just means this one thing: my life offered as a sacrifice of love. This should be so real to you that it affects your identity. And maybe for you, it's time for a redefinition of your identity. That you would, an identity statement is a statement that says, I am. Anytime you talk about yourself and you find coming out of you this statement, I am, you're about to make an identity statement. You're about to talk about how you view yourself, who you think you are. And what if you were so transformed by this that you came to say, I am a Samaritan. I am a Samaritan. And so, to be a Samaritan of this quality just means sacrifice. And so it may mean for you taking the risk of helping an actual neighbor with a crisis. And it might become costly to do so. There's a man in our fellowship. He's been a part of this fellowship a long time. I've just learned this. I sort of accidentally learned it. He's never said it. He's never, to my knowledge, ever told anyone. I just sort of stumbled upon it. This man he's actually paid for 2 separate funerals for some people around him and never made a peep about it. It was radical and excessive. And it may mean for you the cost of moving towards someone who has hurt you badly or even repetitively. The cost for you is the cost of the forgiveness you give. The cost is the risk you take to open yourself again through the possibility of maybe being hurt again. It's radical and excessive kindness. This may mean it changes your whole relationship map with your spouse. That you are going to be the one who stops the spiraling process of retaliation for retaliation because you retaliated, because I retaliated, because you retaliated, because I retaliated. I'm going to stop the process. I'm going to interrupt it with kindness. Maybe not deserved, maybe not expected, certainly not one-time kindness. I'm turning to consistent kindness. This may mean that you stop ignoring or shutting someone out. So there's a body of research that's kind of rising up among social scientists that in adults, there actually turns out to be a social behavior that is actually worse than bullying among adults. And that is, you think that bullying might be the worst social behavior, but in adults it actually turns out to be ostracized. To to be told you don't belong. And so it just means for you it may be that it means opening up again. And so it just means that we're redefined. And so now for the last moment of this message, I want you to do this. I want you to stop thinking of yourself as an individual, that I'm talking to you individually. And I want you to think about who you are in this room. And so in your imagination, I want to ask you to connect yourself to every other person in this room, because you are a community of Christ followers. And so we have a call as a community. And that call is to actually let our lights shine in such a way that they see the good work and they look at God. Listen to the bottom line. There is little chance that our culture will come to Christ until the Christ followers of a community begin to live in a radically different way. Watch this last verse. 1 Peter 3. I'm going to do it out of the New Living Translation. So Peter writes under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, instead you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. It means you must set Him apart as the leader of your life. He calls the shots in your life. And so if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. Paul's right there. What would ever motivate a person to ask you for the hope that is in you? It would have to be that the quality of your life is so distinct to them and so appealing to them and so drawing to them that they say, why are you so different? How many of those, right, have you had this week? But do this in a gentle, synonym for kind, a gentle and respectful way. And so what he's saying here is you owe the world your words. Your words about that this is Christ. Christ has come into my life. He's made a huge difference. Use your words. But alongside it, he's saying, but keep your conscience clear. Why would you need to keep your conscience clear? You keep your conscience clear if your life is consistent with your words. And so he's saying then if people, your life radiates that very same thing. And so then if people speak against you, they'll be ashamed when they see what a good life you live because you belong to Christ. Our kindness can change the world. But it comes when we deeply surrender our character to the life of Christ in us. Let's bow together. 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 Let's